So, Gnome's doing his rehearsal lines here um, about the infeasibility of a one-state solution. I've seen him go through uh, this spiel on multiple occasions. Um, he sets up the premise as that um, people suggest that there's two options. The two options are, you can have a two-state solution um, in whatever configuration that may be, um, or you can have a one-state solution, which is that the Israelis just take over the whole area, and then you have a civil rights struggle in the region, and it ends with full voting rights for Palestine, full land rights, etc., etc. And Chomsky says, but this is you're excluding the third possibility, which is that things will maintain themselves the way they are now, which is that the Israelis just behave as though there's a one state in place, but just take all the arable land, and essentially kick the Palestinians out, into the desert sort of thing, let them starve, bomb them, just essentially treat them like rats, more or less, right? And I really strongly disagree with what he's saying. I do agree with the immediate premise, and this I've noticed on a few things that Chomsky seems to be a little well, he's an old guy, and I think that the immediacy of now becomes more urgent as you age, right? So when you start thinking in shorter time frames, it can kind of mess up your conclusions and your ability to see how things must inevitably unfold. What he's describing as the current reality, and what he's suggesting is inevitable unless a two-state solution is arrived at, is in fact unsustainable. The way things are now cannot continue forever. Again, if you're looking at history in shorter frames, because what your maximum endpoint is, you may see that urgency, right? And you may say things will just continue as they are. But how long? 20 years, 30 years, 40 years? Okay, what happens when the Israelis do get all the arable land? When they do take through all the settlements? Well, you have a one state. You have a single state, right? What do you do with the Palestinians in the West Bank? Do you build cages around them? Do you enslave them? I mean, what do you do with them? And thus the status quo must arrive at a solution to that eventually. And if it doesn't, then you get the so-called demographic problem, right? That's what I think that Noam is missing. He's thinking that they can just do this forever. But I think that the whole argument is that they can't. That there has to come a point um, where there's no way forward but integration. And the argument is that prolonging that is just prolonging the suffering. You're just um, prolonging the inevitable and making people miserable in the process. So the smarter approach is to kind of um, relent in terms of the Israeli state taking over, and then fight for a civil rights struggle when it comes up, right? Um, Now, Noam can get really, really snotty when people put that at him. He'll accuse you of supporting, you know, the continuation of the status quo when you argue for that. I really think that he may be um, rationalizing a little bit of Zionism inside of him. I don't think it's any secret that Noam has, in the quite distant past nowadays, did have an existence as a settler in Israel. And to his credit, he realized this wasn't going the way he wanted it to, and left. But at the same time, I think that those sorts of rummed ideas are really what you're hearing when he makes this argument. And I think that, unfortunately, it's actually he himself that is upholding the status quo when he argues against a civil rights struggle in Palestine for the precise reason that I think he knows it's the only thing that's ever going to work. If you watch enough lectures by him, you can see that his contempt is real, right? I'm not questioning anything along those lines. I'm just pointing out that I think that if you look carefully, you can see that, and you listen carefully, you can see that it is apparent that Noam does support an exclusive state for the Israeli people, and does not truly want that exclusive Israeli state to be overrun by the so-called demographic problem. That's not mutually exclusive to, supporting real rights for Palestinians. That's why he's in such support of a two-state solution, because he does think that they should have human rights and they should be treated with dignity. And what the Israeli military is doing is wrong. And all of these things, right? But he doesn't want a single secular state. And there may be some foresight there. How long is it going to last for? How long before the tables are turned, right? I made this argument regarding the Saudis and Assad. It may, the Americans may not be justified in demanding that Assad step down. I mean, who the hell are they? What right do they have? But, the global consensus needs to be that after however many years worth of fighting for fighting an existential struggle against these lunatics that are coming in from the Saudi Arabia, you cannot expect the Assad, Assad himself or the generals that he's working with, you cannot expect them to just, shrug it off, well, we won the war, but, let's get along now. No. If you don't remove Assad from power, you're going to see a Syrian invasion of Saudi Arabia at some point. It may take 15 years for them to build up enough to do it, but it's going to happen. You're going to see terrorist attacks inside Saudi Arabia. You can't leave them in place. You have to take the leadership out, okay? Or you're going to have, a perpetual war there until it does happen, right? And I think that the same thing is true in Saudi Arabia, even if the discussion is not so immediate. So, I mean, it's like, if you set up a one-state solution in Palestine, do you really think that, once the Palestinians get the majority, do you really think they're going to be nice? I mean, it's justice on some level, but it's not healthy for the region, and you gotta. It's only fair that you have a little bit of a national streak in you, right? I mean, even if you agree that the Israeli state is guilty of horrible war crimes, that doesn't mean you want the same thing to happen to your people, right? So, maybe it's sort of complicated, maybe it's sort of not, but I think that you need to be careful with Noam's arguments regarding Israel, not for the reasons that the right might throw at you, but because he seems to be more on their side than a lot of people might think. It works both ways, though, too, right? You could consider the BDS issue. I think Noam is completely 100% spot on with the BDS issue. It's a foolish tactic. It'll absolutely backfire. There's way better ideas. But, I mean, if you look at it carefully, he's right. But, I mean, look, where is... he can be right and maybe a little nationalist at the same time, right? And still, acknowledge that, something's got to be done, right? So, I mean, the whole argument behind the need for a civil rights movement, as opposed to a two-state solution, is that there is only one real endpoint, and it is the status quo. But the status quo is not sustainable. The status quo will necessarily, eventually, result in some kind of a struggle. Either, as soon as possible, or simply when they run out of land, right? I mean, there are going to be crisis points where, there's nowhere left to put them. And there's nothing left to do but fight. So, if you want to have this work out, the way to do it is to take control of it now. Say, explain to everybody that there is no possible outcome besides integration, and actually kind of work towards that in a controlled way, rather than in a way that may lead to violence or possibly even genocide, right? That's my take on that. He's assuming the status quo is a lot more stable than it actually is, and the ability of the Israeli state to perpetuate the status quo. I think that if he was really challenged on that point precisely, he may actually relent. I've never seen anybody actually do it, but I think it's more of a function of seeing the future in a shorter time frame. And that if you do see the future in a longer time frame, you can see that this can't continue forever. And there is really only one solution. It is a one-state solution, and it's a one-state solution in a secular state where everybody has equal rights.